In this tutorial we're going to look at another example of iteration within Python. Remember, iteration, also called repetition, is the process of repeating a series of commands multiple times. In the previous tutorials we've made use of the for loop, and the for loop had a control variable, in this example called I, and you had to specify the range that you wanted the for loop to use, in this case from 0 to 10. You could then do whatever you wanted to repeat inside the actual loop. In this case, just let's print the control variable I. If we execute this program, we're telling Python to repeat the commands inside this loop until the condition's being met. In this case, until we've got to the value 9 here. Remember, one problem that we have that we always have to remember about a for loop is it stops 1 before this value here. And that's one way to get a series of commands repeated, to iterate them using the for loop. Another looping structure that we have in Python is known as a while, and there are one or two subtle differences. The first thing you need to know about a while is there's no control variable built into it. You have to create the variable that terminates, that stops the loop. So in this case we're going to create a simple variable called a and assign it the value 0. We're then going to start the while loop, and the condition that we're going to set for the while loop is while a is less than 10. And again, we end this line of code here with the colon, just like we did with the for and just like we did with the if statement. This then triggers the indent in Python. We then say what we want to do as part of this while condition, so let's just print the a value. And then, because we don't have a for loop here that would automatically increment the control variable, we've got to do that ourselves. So we need an additional line here that says a equals a plus 1. So, let's have a look at what we've got here. We've set up a variable that's going to control this loop. In this case we've called it a and assigned it the value 0. We've then introduced the while condition, and the test that we're going to use for this is while a is less than 10. So this code here indented will be repeated so long as a remains less than 10. So the first thing we'll do is print the a value, so first time round that will be 0. We then add 1 to a, so a will become 1 rather. So next time round the loop a is 1, we then print it, add 1 to it, so we get 2, next time round the loop, and so on, until a is no longer less than 10. So let's run this code and see what we get. So we run it, and we have a look at the output that we've got here, and just as expected, it started at 0, because that was a's initial value. It then outputted 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 9. Okay. Now it stopped at the value 9, because of course once a became 10, well 10 is not less than 10, so it wouldn't have actually printed the 10 value. If we wanted to print 10, we'd have to change this condition by either making it less than or equal to. Let's run that and see what we would get. This time we get the numbers all the way down to 10. Or we could have left it as less than, but instead make this 11. So if we were to run it now, again, we would get the same output, from 0 all the way down to 10. And that's an example of how you would basically use a while loop. Again, once the while loop has completed, you can add code down here that would be executed once this condition was false and it dropped out of the loop. So we could just add an extra bit of code here that said print completed loop, just so that we can prove that once this condition is no longer true, we stop repeating this code and we drop down and continue execution from down here. So let's press play again, and this time we get the output 0 all the way down to 10, and then of course once it's finished this loop here, it outputs completed loop because we've now finished. And that's an example of a while loop, which concludes this tutorial.